You know, in just 5 years, one small South American nation pulled off something that most countries only dream of. It is a story of crisis, of vision, and of a radical reinvention that, honestly, offers a blueprint for the entire world. And today, we're going to break down exactly how they did it. Get this, nearly 98% of Uruguay's electricity now comes from renewable sources. Now, to put that in perspective, just over a decade ago, that number was less than half. The country was dangerously hooked on fossil fuels. So how on earth did they pull off such a massive, rapid transformation? So we're going to break this incredible journey down into 5 parts. We'll start with the crisis that forced their hand, and we'll end with the powerful lessons this story holds for all of us today. Okay, so let's rewind. Our story starts back in the early 2000s, when Uruguay's future looked anything but bright. In fact, it looked pretty dark. For Uruguay, this wasn't just some thought experiment. It was a very real, looming threat. See, they have no oil or gas reserves of their own. Their entire grid was like a house of cards, built on 2 very shaky foundations: expensive imported fuel and drought-prone hydropower. It was a system just waiting to collapse. And then, boom, a perfect storm hit. Energy demand was suddenly spiking. At the same time, global oil prices tripled and then kept climbing to insane heights. And just when they desperately needed their hydropower dams, a series of crippling droughts hit. The lights went out, the bills skyrocketed, the country was truly pushed to the brink. And this wasn't just some high-level policy problem. As Uruguayan journalist Luis Prats remembers it, this was just part of daily life. The threat of darkness was always there, this constant reminder of how vulnerable the nation was. Something had to change. The country had hit its breaking point. And it's right here, out of this crisis, that an unlikely hero emerged. His name was Ramón Méndez Galain, a nuclear physicist who saw a completely different path forward. Now, at the time, the mainstream idea being thrown around was to build a new nuclear power plant. That was the sensible solution. But Méndez, he looked at Uruguay's vast, windswept plains and saw an untapped gold mine. He proposed something truly radical. Forget nuclear, forget fossil fuels. The future was literally blowing in the wind and shining down from the sun. And here's the brilliant part. Méndez's pitch wasn't really about the environment. He framed this whole transition as a pragmatic economic strategy. This was about energy independence. This was about stable, lower costs. It was, simply put, the smartest business decision the country could possibly make. And this, right here, is the absolute secret to Uruguay's success. Méndez's vision was so compelling that in 2010, every single political party, left, right, and center, signed on. They made the energy revolution a national state policy, guaranteeing it would survive any change in government. This wasn't just one man's idea anymore. It was a national project. Okay, so they had the vision, they had the political will, but how in the world did they actually pay for all this and make it happen? This is where the real genius kicks in. Instead of the state going into massive debt, they came up with this incredible public-private partnership. The state utility, called UT, kept control of the grid, but they invited private companies to build and run the new wind farms. These companies had to compete in auctions, which drove the price way down, and the winners got a guaranteed 20-year contract to sell their energy back to UT. It was a total win-win. You see, it wasn't just one single policy, but this whole web of interlocking strategies. That political unity gave investors the confidence they needed. That confidence was backed up by crystal-clear regulations. And by making sure workers and local communities were on board, they built this foundation of social support that made the entire thing unshakable. And this idea of a just transition, it wasn't some afterthought. It was absolutely central to the whole plan. By promising to retrain workers and create tens of thousands of new jobs, they basically turned potential opposition into active support. They proved you don't have to choose between saving the planet and growing your economy. So the blueprint was in place, the plan was in motion. But did it work? Well, let's look at the truly astonishing results. Just look at this transformation. The grid is now completely dominated by clean energy. Wind power alone makes up 40% of all the electricity they generate. And those old fossil fuel plants, they're now just a backup, used for a tiny, tiny fraction of the year. And hey, remember Méndez's economic argument? Well, he was spot on. Generating electricity in Uruguay is now 50% cheaper than it was back in the fossil fuel era. That is just a staggering drop in cost. But perhaps the most incredible result of all is this. Uruguay went from being a desperate energy importer, completely at the mercy of its neighbors, to a clean energy exporter, selling its surplus wind and solar power to Argentina and Brazil. What a turnaround. So what did all this actually mean for the average person living in Uruguay? Well, it meant lower, more stable electricity bills. It meant the end of those dreaded blackouts. It meant new jobs, cleaner air, and you have to imagine a profound sense of national pride in what they all accomplished together. No, Uruguay's story is incredible all by itself, but its greatest value might just be in the lessons it offers the rest of us. Ramón Méndez isn't done. He actually runs an NGO now, and it's dedicated to sharing this model with the world. He wants to prove that this wasn't some fluke of geography or politics. His mission is to show that what happened in Uruguay can happen anywhere. So, what's the playbook? Well, Uruguay's success gives us a pretty clear one. First, you unify all political players behind one single long-term goal. Second, you create a stable environment with clear rules that makes it safe and profitable for private companies to invest. Third, and this is crucial, you make sure the transition is fair so that everyone shares in the benefits. And finally, you use the power of the state not to get in the way, but to guide and enable all of that progress. In less than a decade, a small nation that was facing a massive crisis completely changed its destiny and created a model for the future. They proved that a rapid, a just, and a profitable transition to clean energy isn't some pipe dream, it's a choice. So the only real question left is, who's going to be next?